Good evening, beautiful people. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Hope you're having a fantastic day and week. Welcome to our live weekly YouTube readings of the final report of the California Reparations Task Force, right here on the CJEC YouTube channel. This is the only live reading of the California Reparations Task Force final report on YouTube. The final report of the first in the nation California Reparations Task Force is one of, if not the most important, government reports about the Black American community since the 1960s. Equally important, it's also the foundation for the current and future reparations legislation in California. The report is nearly 1,100 pages long, and we're bringing you every page of it, chapter by chapter, every week on Thursday at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, so that you are properly educated in your advocacy for reparations in California. Today's reading of the final report is presented to you as a community service with support from the Reparations Organizing and Mobilizing Team at the Coalition for a Just and Equitable California, CJEC. CJEC is California's leading grassroots organization born for reparations and the reparative justice for Black American freedmen living in California. For more info on CJEC and our work helping to enact the law that created the California Reparations Task Force, California's law requiring state agencies to collect data on descendants of U.S. slavery, the Act to End Current Slavery in California State Prisons, the California Freedmen Affairs Bill, and more, visit www.cjecofficial.org. Before we go any further, right now I need you to do three things. Like this video, hit the bell for reminders, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. After we're done reading tonight, I need you to do three more things. Get connected, follow CJEC on all social media, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and Twitter at CJEC Official. Get informed. Visit www.cjecofficial.org and sign up for current and accurate California reparations news and info on our Get Involved page. And get involved. Support our work by volunteering and or donating. To donate, just click the Donate tab on the home page of our website. Special thanks to our amazing fiscal sponsor, the California Black Women's Health Project. By way of introduction, my name is Marcus Champion. I live in South Central Los Angeles, California. I'm from Inglewood, California, and I'm a founding member and volunteer reparations advocate with CJEC's Reparations Organizing and Mobilizing Team. The agenda for today, Chapter 21 of the final report of the California Reparations Task Force. The title of the chapter we're reading tonight is Chapter 21, Policies Addressing Political Disenfranchisement. You can follow along in the reading, download tonight's chapter, or the full final report yourself by going to our website, www.cjec-official.org/reports. Okay, we're about ready to start our reading, but before we do, I have some special thanks and announcements to make. First, I'd like to thank our good friends at ETM Media Group on YouTube for their live readings of the first California Reparations Report. You can watch their readings of the first report on their channel at ETM Media Group on YouTube and on our website at www.cjec-official.org/videos. Second, for those of you who don't know, historic reparations legislation in California is here and more is coming. SB 490 is California's first lineage-based reparations-related legislation to establish the California American Freedmen Affairs Agency. The bill was introduced by State Senator Stephen Bradford and will move forward in 2024. To read the bill, visit www.cjec-official.org/advocacy. Third, as mentioned, more historic reparations bills are coming. Over the next several months, more reparations bills will be written. During the 2024 legislative session, we'll see those bills introduced and start moving toward passage by majorities of both the California State Assembly and Senate. To pass reparations bills in 2024, we need 41 Assembly members and 21 senators to say yes. When those bills are passed, we need our governor to sign the bill. So, to make reparations a reality in California, The math is 41 plus 21 plus 1. That's 41 assembly members, 21 senators, and 1 governor. 41 plus 21 plus 1 equals reparations in California. Lastly, but not least special, thanks to CJAC's reparations organizing and mobilizing team, and specifically our volunteer final report readers. Without further ado, Chapter 21 of the California Reparations Task Force Final Report. Chapter 21. Policies Addressing Political Disenfranchisement. 1. Policy Recommendations. This chapter details policy recommendations to address harms set forth in Chapter 4, Political Disenfranchisement. The task force recommends that the legislature take the following actions. Require district-based voting and independent redistricting commissions to safeguard against the dilution of the African American voting bloc. Increase funding to support the California Department of Justice's enforcement of voting rights in California. Enact legislation aligning with the objectives of AB 2576 and establish separate funding to support educational and civic engagement activities. Provide funding to NGOs whose work focuses on increasing civic engagement among African Americans. Declare Election Day a paid state holiday and provide support to essential workers to increase access to the polls. Remove the barriers of providing identity to vote. Increase jury participation of persons with felony convictions and discourage judges and attorneys from excluding potential jurors solely for having a prior felony conviction. Increase efforts to restore the voting rights of formerly and currently incarcerated persons and provide access to those who are currently incarcerated and eligible to vote. Require district-based voting and independent redistricting commissions to safeguard against the dilution of the African American voting bloc. Political gerrymandering has a disproportionate impact on African American voters. The experience of African American voters, which is documented in Chapter 4, stems from the perception that African American voters pose a threat to the white political establishment, which historically aimed to maintain the racial hierarchy. Researchers have found that the expansion and protection of Black Americans' political rights improved the socioeconomic position of Black Americans and may have created opportunities for Black American workers to move up the economic ladder. The Voting Rights Act is a national law that protects African American voters and others against attacks on their freedom to vote and their right to fair representation. One of the law's key enforcement mechanisms, Section 2, bans racial discrimination in voting. Because the U.S. Supreme Court weakened other protections offered by the VRA, many states and their political subdivisions have taken the opportunity to pass more discriminatory district maps that unfairly silence the voices of African American voters. The California Voting Rights Act of 2001, CVRA, is the state law that expanded on the federal VRA. The CVRA prohibits an at-large method of election that impairs the ability of a protected class to elect candidates of its choice or its ability to influence the outcome of an election, as a result of the dilution or the abridgment of the rights of the voters who are members of a protected class. Upon a finding of a violation, a court is required to implement appropriate remedies that are tailored to remedy the violation, which could include, among other measures, the imposition of district-based elections. The CVRA helped increase the number of by-district jurisdictions by making it easier for potential plaintiffs to force at-large election jurisdictions into by-district elections. To date, over 170 cities and towns, over 300 school and community college districts, and over 50 hospital, fire, airport, water, and other special districts shifted from at-large to by-district elections since the CVRA became law. In order to address the harms associated with the historical political disenfranchisement of African Americans, the task force recommends that the legislature implement measures to protect the strength of the African American voting bloc by requiring district-based voting and independent redistricting commissions whose maps have binding effect. These independent redistricting commissions should be comprised of members who are representative of the districts being drawn or redrawn, and they should be equipped with resources that are both adequate for their mandate and equal to those afforded to similarly charged commissions. The task force recommends that the legislature take steps to counter political gerrymandering, which has a disproportionately disenfranchising and vote diluting impact on African American voters. At-large voting in particular poses barriers to equal voting. More equitable and representative results are produced when subdivisions elect their officials by district. Independent redistricting commissions put citizens and commissioners in charge of the process, removing politicking and partisan deal-making. When the responsibility of drawing district lines is left with incumbents, concerns about gerrymandering arise, and special interests and protecting incumbency may prevail over fair and equal representation. The City of Los Angeles, for example, currently appoints a commission to draw district maps. However, those maps are subject to revision by council members, and attempts to gerrymander certain districts could still occur. Increase funding to support the California Department of Justice's enforcement of voting rights in California. State attorneys general are uniquely positioned to monitor and take action on voting rights concerns within their jurisdictions. Voting rights investigations and lawsuits, however, are unusually onerous to prepare, sometimes requiring as many as 6,000 hours in staff time combing through registration records in preparation for trial. Moreover, with respect to federal lawsuits, even when favorable decisions have finally been obtained, some of the states affected have merely switched to discriminatory devices not covered by the federal decree, or have enacted difficult new tests designed to prolong the existing disparity between white and Negro registration. These concerns, along with the perverse incentive to prolong litigation in these matters, result in relatively few attorneys willing to bring complex voting rights cases, and even fewer attorneys who have an opportunity to develop expertise to litigate these cases well. Consequently, state attorneys general, who have a unique combination of law enforcement and state-level perspective, are better positioned to enforce, monitor, and investigate voting rights claims. This, however, does not address the complexity and resources required to undertake this work. In order to root out and address the harms associated with the erosion of voting rights of African American voters, the task force recommends that the legislature dedicate funding for the California Attorney General's Office to enforce the California Voting Rights Act and federal voting rights laws. This can include targeting at-large political subdivisions and reviewing efforts to transition to district-based representation where appropriate. This work should also include monitoring and collecting data on racially polarized voting and publishing racially polarized voting analyses, a key component of demonstrating violations of the Federal Voting Rights Act. The publication of racially polarized voting analysis may provide greater clarity about an oversight of sensitive regions and lead to a concentration of resources for areas that are at risk of disenfranchising African American voters. Enforcement by the California Attorney General should seek to determine whether political subdivisions use the drawing or redrawing of district lines to substantially dilute or weaken the political power of African Americans. Enact legislation aligning with the objectives of AB 2576 and establish separate funding to support educational and civic engagement activities. As discussed in Chapter 4, Political Disenfranchisement, African Americans face increased threats to their liberty after the end of Reconstruction. Groups like the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People organize and mobilize to assert equal rights, including upholding the guarantees of the 14th and 15th Amendments to the United States Constitution. To ensure that these efforts are not lost on younger generations, and to cultivate a sense of reverence for the journey of African American political power, the task force recommends that the legislature provide funding and direction to support grants to county registrars of voters for programs that integrate voter registration and pre-registration with civic education for high school students, including programs to allow students to serve as election workers, as was intended by Assembly Bill number 2576. Through this recommendation, the task force intends for these programs to be institutionalized through legislation so that there's a long-term and continued commitment to increase the importance of African American civic engagement by creating educational opportunities for young adults. In implementing this recommendation, the legislature could fulfill the objective of AB 2576 by providing separate funding with the intent to support African Americans who have historically experienced disproportionate disenfranchisement. AB 2576 would have required the Secretary of State to provide grants to county election officials or other specified entities for voter registration in counties where voter registration is less than 80% of eligible voters. AB number 2576 would have also required the Secretary of State to make grants for learning and outreach, and to county registrars of voters for programs that integrate voter registration and pre-registration with civic education for high school students, including programs that allow students to serve as election workers. While some of these programs have been implemented under California Secretary of State Dr. Shirley N. Weber, the aim of this recommendation is to institutionalize these programs such that they remain in place irrespective of future changes in administration. The task force recommends that the legislature adopt the grant programs contemplated by AB number 2576, with a directed focus on school districts and voting precincts whose registered voter population do not reflect the proportionality of African American populations. The task force recommends amendments to the Education Code and Elections Code where appropriate to provide opportunities for high school students to participate in live elections and take part in mock elections and other civic educational opportunities. The task force recommends that the legislature establish a funding stream specifically for schools predominantly attended by African Americans or establish annual funding for a broader statewide program. Student surveys for similar programs in Illinois have shown that 93% of students reported being more likely to vote in the future, with 90% reporting that they will be willing to serve as election judges again in the future. Provide funding to NGOs whose work focuses on increasing civic engagement among African Americans. From Ella Baker to John Lewis, and from the Organization of Colored Ladies to the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, African Americans and African American organizations have long played an important role in organizing, educating, and registering African American voters. To support the initiatives discussed above, the task force recommends that the legislature provide a funding stream for local organizations that focus on increasing civic engagement among African Americans. Non-governmental organizations, in turn, could provide support in campaign strategy, training, political discourse seminars, and workshops offering support and training for those wishing to organize within their communities. Funding could also support voter education and outreach campaigns in communities of low voter turnout and among youth to establish a pipeline of voter engagement. Selection and oversight of these organizations could be administered by the California American Freedmen Affairs Agency, which may review grant proposals and program efficacy. Declare Election Day a paid state holiday and provide support to essential workers to increase access to the polls. The task force recommends that the legislature declare Election Day a paid state holiday. The aim of this recommendation is to address the historical barriers to voting, including the financial burdens that disproportionately affect African American voters and limit their ability to access the polls. While many voters utilize voting by mail, California could use this day to organize state-sponsored events on Election Day to facilitate voting, such as free public transportation and informational bulletins. The task force further recommends, as a potential expansion of this recommendation, that primary elections also be included for holiday consideration. This would recognize the history of excluding African American voters from state primary elections as discussed in Chapter 4, Political Disenfranchisement. For political subdivisions that are dominated by a single party, primary elections often determine who will ultimately hold office. Further, to increase the impact of making Election Day a paid holiday, the task force recommends establishing a funding stream for the publication of voter education materials, such as fact sheets dispelling the myth of widespread voter fraud and publications disseminating post-election statistics to promote confidence in state elections. Remove the barrier of providing identity to vote. Claims of voter fraud have been used to justify laws that suppress African American voting, most prominently voter identification laws. States disproportionately enforce voter ID laws against African American voters. This is so despite that voter fraud is very rare. Indeed, voter impersonation is virtually non-existent, and many instances of alleged fraud are in fact mistakes by voters or administrators. Voter ID laws have also served as a proxy for disenfranchising non-white voters. With respect to mail-in ballots, the votes of African Americans are often rejected at higher rates than those of white voters. The task force recommends that the legislature direct the undertaking of a study to identify, examine, and address barriers to voter registration that have been enacted in response to myths of voter fraud, such as by documenting the limited availability of DMV services in rural areas and the cost of obtaining identification or supporting documents to provide identity. In some cases, a California voter is not required to show identification to a polling place worker before casting a ballot. However, those voting for the first time after registering to vote by mail and who did not provide a driver's license number, California identification number, or the last 4 digits of their Social Security number on their registration form may be asked to show a form of identification when going to the polls. Additionally, a voter may have their qualification to vote challenged as not being the person whose name appears on the roster, at which point the voter may be required to affirm their identity to resolve the challenge. The recommendation seeks to recognize and address the harms in this area with respect to voter identification by cutting off an opportunity for voter disenfranchisement through identification requirements. The task force recommends that the legislature provide African Americans with stipends or fee waivers to obtain government-issued documents such as driver's licenses, identification cards, birth certificates, and passports to meet any voter registration or identification requirement that may be promulgated. Increase jury participation of persons with felony convictions and discourage judges and attorneys from excluding potential jurors solely for having a prior felony conviction. In California, as of April 2020, the felony arrest rate of African Americans was 3,229 per 100,000 in the population, 3.5 times the overall rate. Overall, African Americans remain overrepresented in California's prison population. African American men are in prison at a rate 10 times higher than that of white men, while African American women are in prison at a rate 5 times higher than that of white women. Across the United States, 1/3 of African American men have been convicted of a felony. This data suggests that there may also be an overrepresentation of African Americans who have been excluded from jury service because of their prior felony conviction. Existing California law now allows, with a prior felony conviction, and those who have completed probation and parole to participate in jury service as long as they are not registered felony sex offenders. One aim of this law was to ensure that the underrepresented groups, including African Americans, truly have a jury of their peers. While the law in this area restored eligibility for jury service, the aim of this recommendation is to encourage participation in jury service. To accomplish this goal, The task force recommends that the legislature offer guidance to courts about disfavoring the disqualification of jurors based solely on their prior status as an incarcerated individual or a person's general opposition to the death penalty. This should also include conducting ongoing surveys and analyses of excused jurors to identify trends. The task force further recommends that the legislature implement measures or programs to provide greater support for those serving on juries, including free child care and transportation during jury duty, and educational materials that highlight the importance of jury duty among African Americans and the implications of not serving on a jury. To support this recommendation, the task force recommends that the legislature consider eliminating preemptory challenges altogether, as is the case in Arizona, or encouraging the modification of existing rules to emphasize that a prior felony conviction is an invalid basis for the exercise of a preemptory challenge. Increase efforts to restore the voting rights of formerly and currently incarcerated persons and provide access to those who are currently incarcerated and eligible to vote. The right to vote is fundamental to American citizenship, but the unjust legal system has perpetuated the disenfranchisement of African Americans. That disenfranchisement has left this community at a comparative disadvantage in political representation, as discussed in Chapter 4, Political Disenfranchisement. In October 2022, the California Department of Justice issued 2 information bulletins that relate to the voting rights of persons with a criminal history. One information bulletin was directed to all local law enforcement agencies in California, detailing the categories of incarcerated individuals who are and are not eligible to vote. Incarcerated individuals in California who are not eligible to vote are those serving time in state or federal prison or in county jail under prison terms/conditions. Proposition 17 was approved in November 2020 and amended the California Constitution to provide people on parole for felony convictions the right to vote in California. Another information bulletin was directed to all county probation departments in California to ensure access to voting for eligible persons who are under the supervision of probation departments. In order to begin to correct this aspect of the legacy of an unjust legal system, the task force recommends that the legislature enact legislation to preserve and expand the voting rights of incarcerated individuals. All eligible Californians deserve the right to vote, even those involved in the criminal justice system. Specifically, the task force recommends that the legislature increase efforts to restore the voting rights of persons who have completed their terms or are on parole by increasing access to voter registration and polling precincts. Legislation should require the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, CDCR, to affirmatively provide individuals being released from prison with voter registration information. The task force further recommends that the CDCR and Secretary of State receive funding to facilitate voting in correctional settings by either establishing polling sites within correctional facilities or providing access to mail-in voting while incarcerated consistent with eligibility. Finally, the task force calls on the legislature to take the re-enfranchisement movement further and restore voting rights to all incarcerated persons, including those serving state or federal prison terms. And that will conclude tonight's reading of Chapter 21 of the California Reparations Task Force Final Report. Before you go, if you haven't done so already, don't forget to like the video, hit the bell for reminders, subscribe to our YouTube channel. When you go, don't forget to get connected. Follow CJEC on all social media, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and Twitter, at CJEC Official. Get informed. Visit www.cjec-official.org and sign up for the current and accurate California reparations news and info on our Get Involved page. Support our work by volunteering and or donating. To donate, just click the Donate tab on the home page of our website. Special thanks to our amazing fiscal sponsor, the California Black Women's Health Project. Thank you all so much for your time. I appreciate you all. We are closer to reparations than we've ever been in California. Everybody have a good night.